The crew arrived at 7:14 in the morning. There were 4 of them. 2 with shovels, 1 with a chainsaw, 1 with a clipboard. They did not knock on the door. They did not call ahead. They did not wait. By 9:40 in the morning, everything was gone. The roses his wife had planted with her own hands the summer before her diagnosis. The lavender border she had measured 3 times to get perfectly straight. The Japanese maple she had driven 200 miles to find because it was the exact shade of red she had dreamed about. Gone. All of it. Gone. And the man who had built that garden with her. Who had knelt in that same dirt every weekend for 11 years, who had stood at her graveside 6 weeks earlier and promised he would keep it alive forever. He was at work, teaching 3rd grade, 22 miles away. He did not know what was waiting for him when he got home, but the HOA did, and what happened next is one of the most complete, most surgical acts of legal destruction this country has ever seen carried out by one ordinary man with nothing left to lose. Raymond Cole was not the kind of man anyone would have predicted this story for. He was 54 years old, a 3rd grade teacher for 26 years at Lakewood Elementary in Clarksville, Tennessee. He coached youth baseball on Saturdays. He went to the same church he had attended since he was 9 years old. He drove a 2009 Ford pickup with 180,000 miles on it because he said it still ran fine and there was no reason to waste money. His neighbors described him the same way everyone always describes the people. This happens to, quiet, kept to himself, never caused trouble. What they also said, if you asked the right questions, was this: Raymond Cole was one of the most patient men they had ever met. That patience was not natural. It was learned. It was learned through 11 years of watching his wife, Margaret, fight cancer. Margaret Cole was diagnosed with stage 2 breast cancer in 2011. She beat it. In 2015, it came back as stage 3. She beat it again. In 2020, it came back for the last time. Stage 4, metastatic, spread to her liver and her spine. She was given between 6 months and 2 years. She lived for 3 years and 1 month, and during those 3 years, while Margaret was in and out of treatment, while Raymond was working full-time and managing her care and handling everything a household requires, Margaret Cole had one project, one thing that was entirely hers. The garden. She had started it the spring of her first diagnosis. Just a few flower beds along the front walkway. Something to do with her hands on the days when treatment left her exhausted but too restless to sleep. Over 11 years, it grew into something extraordinary. 7 raised beds. A stone pathway she had laid herself, 1 flagstone at a time, over 3 summers. A Japanese maple that anchored the entire left side, chosen for its color, a deep wine red that Margaret said reminded her of autumn in the mountains, where she had grown up, a lavender border along the fence line that bloomed every June and filled the entire front of the house with a smell that Raymond said he would never be able to describe to anyone who had not stood there themselves. And roses. 14 rose bushes, each one a different variety, each one representing a different year of their marriage. Raymond had helped her plant every single one. When Margaret could no longer kneel, he built her a low bench so she could sit and still reach the soil. When her hands became too weak for the pruning shears, he bought her lighter ones. When she was in the hospital for her final 3 weeks, Raymond went out every morning before school and watered the garden himself. He sent her photos every day. She died on a Tuesday in March of 2023. Raymond buried her on a Friday. The following Monday, he went back to school because Margaret had made him promise he would not disappear, and the HOA sent their first letter 6 weeks later. Creekside Commons was a planned residential community in a suburb of Clarksville. 340 homes. Established in 2004. Monthly dues of $285 per household. The HOA had been operational for nearly 20 years. And in that time, it had developed a reputation that the community had simply learned to live with. Strict was the polite word. Aggressive was the more accurate one. The board was 5 members. The president for the past 7 years was a man named Gerald Pratt. Pratt was a retired commercial real estate developer, 61 years old, who had moved into Creekside Commons in 2016 and won the HOA presidency in 2017 by a margin of 11 votes. Under Pratt's leadership, the HOA had issued more than 2,400 violation notices in 6 years. Fines had increased 3 times. The reserve fund, which when Pratt took over sat at $800,000, had grown, at least on paper, to $2.3 million on paper. 2 former board members had quietly resigned their positions in 2021 and 2022. Neither of them said publicly why. Both of them declined to comment when local reporters later came calling. Pratt had also formed what he called the Community Standards Committee, a small group of homeowners who walked the neighborhood twice a week and photographed any property that might be in violation of the HOA's 74-page covenant. Raymond Cole's garden had been on their radar for years. The issue was not the garden itself. The covenant allowed front yard landscaping. The issue, according to Pratt, was the height of the raised beds, the placement of the stone pathway, and specifically, a Japanese maple that Pratt had determined was planted too close to the sidewalk by approximately 14 inches. Raymond had received 3 warning letters before Margaret died. He had responded to each one in writing, politely, citing the relevant sections of the covenant, explaining why each violation notice was incorrect. He had even included photographs and measurements. The board had not responded to a single letter. They had, however, continued to send violation notices, and 6 weeks after Margaret's funeral, the notices escalated. Stay with me. Because what they did next, and why they specifically chose that moment to do it, is the part that will change how you see this entire story. The letter arrived on a Wednesday in late April. Raymond came home from school, found it in the mailbox, and stood in his driveway to read it. It was not a warning notice. It was a formal notice of noncompliance from the Creekside Commons HOA. It cited 4 violations: the Japanese maple, the raised bed height, the stone pathway, and a 4th violation that had not appeared in any previous letter. The garden as a whole was described as creating, and this is the actual language they used, an aesthetic inconsistency incompatible with Creekside Commons community standards. The letter gave Raymond 30 days to remediate all 4 violations. It also included a remediation cost estimate. The HOA was offering to resolve all violations on Raymond's behalf, using their approved contractors for a fee of $4,800. If Raymond declined, the violations would result in daily fines beginning on day 31. Raymond read the letter twice. He set it on his kitchen table. He made himself dinner. He did not sleep well that night. The next morning before school, he sat down and wrote a response. 2 pages. Calm, detailed, and specific. He cited the covenant section that defined raised bed height limitations, which set the maximum at 24 inches. His beds were 22 inches. He included the original survey of his property, showing the Japanese maple's placement was 14 inches from the sidewalk boundary, but that the covenant setback requirement applied only to trees with a mature trunk diameter exceeding 6 inches. The maple's trunk diameter was 4.5 inches. He sent the letter via certified mail. He also, and this is where Raymond Cole separated himself from every other person who had ever received a letter like this. He began keeping a file, every letter in, every letter out, every certified mail receipt, every photograph, dates, times, specific measurements. He had no plan yet. He was a 3rd grade teacher, not a lawyer. But something in that letter had triggered a part of Raymond Cole that grief had temporarily buried. The part that was patient, the part that could wait. The HOA did not respond to his letter. 31 days later, Raymond came home from school to find 4 men in his front yard. He pulled into his driveway at 4:17 in the afternoon. The garden was already gone, not damaged, not partially removed. Gone. The raised beds had been torn out. The flagstones had been pulled up and stacked in a pile at the edge of the driveway. The lavender border had been removed down to the roots. The rose bushes, all 14 of them, were already in the back of a truck. One of the men was running a chainsaw near the left side of the yard. Raymond got out of his truck. He walked to the man with the chainsaw and told him to stop. The man stopped. He pointed to the man with the clipboard. The man with the clipboard handed Raymond a 1-page document. It was an authorization for HOA remediation dated that day, signed by Gerald Pratt as HOA president. It cited Raymond's failure to remediate within the 30-day window. It cited the HOA's right under section 12.4 of the covenant to perform remediation on non-compliant properties and bill the cost to the homeowner. Raymond looked at the yard. He looked at the document. He looked at the man with the chainsaws who was standing 3 feet from his wife's Japanese maple. Raymond Cole took a breath. He said 4 words. He said, "Not that tree, please." The man with the clipboard said it was on the violation list. Raymond said it one more time. "Not that tree, please." The man with the clipboard made a call. Whoever he called said something back. The man with the clipboard nodded and looked at Raymond and said, "It goes." They cut the tree down at 4:31 in the afternoon. Raymond stood in his driveway and watched. He did not argue. He did not interfere. He did not raise his voice, but here is what Raymond Cole did do. He went inside. He got his phone. He came back outside, and he began filming. He filmed the men, the truck, the license plates, the contractor logo on the side of the truck. He filmed the clipboard man and asked him calmly for his name and the name of the contracting company. The man said his name was Dave Kessler. The company was Pratt Property Services. Raymond stopped filming. He looked at the name on the side of the truck again. Pratt Property Services. He stood there for a long moment. Then he went inside, sat down at his kitchen table, opened his laptop, and typed 2 words into the search. Gerald Pratt. What he found in the next 4 hours is what changed everything. Pratt Property Services was registered in Tennessee as a limited liability company, owner of record, Gerald Thomas Pratt. The same Gerald Thomas Pratt who had been president of the Creekside Commons HOA for 7 years. The same Gerald Thomas Pratt who had the authority to authorize remediation work on any property in the community. The same Gerald Thomas Pratt whose company had just charged Raymond Cole $4,800 to destroy his wife's garden. Raymond sat with that for a while. Then he started digging over the next 3 weeks. Working evenings and weekends, Raymond built a timeline. He requested public records through Tennessee's Open Records Act. He obtained copies of HOA board meeting minutes going back 5 years. He cross-referenced every remediation contract the HOA had authorized since Pratt took the presidency. The pattern was not subtle. In 7 years, the Creekside Commons HOA had authorized 84 property remediations. Pratt Property Services had received the contract for 79 of them. The other 5 had been awarded to a company called Allied Landscape Solutions. Raymond looked up Allied Landscape Solutions. Its registered agent was a man named Kevin Pratt, Gerald Pratt's younger brother. Between Pratt Property Services and Allied Landscape Solutions, the 2 companies had collected $1.4 million in HOA authorized remediation fees from Creekside Commons homeowners over 7 years. Every single dollar of that work had been authorized by Gerald Pratt, the man whose company and whose brother's company received the contracts. Raymond Cole was not a lawyer, but he had been a teacher for 26 years, and teachers know how to read. He pulled up Tennessee state law on homeowner association governance. He pulled up federal regulations on fiduciary duty. He looked up the specific legal term for what he was reading. It was called self-dealing. It was in most circumstances a crime. Raymond closed his laptop, went to his bedroom, and looked at the photograph of Margaret on his nightstand. He said out loud, "To an empty room, I found it." Then he did something that almost nobody in his situation would have thought to do. He did not call a lawyer. Not yet. He called his state representative's office because Raymond Cole had figured out something that most people miss when they are angry. A lawsuit is a fight you have in a courtroom, where the other side has resources and lawyers and time, but a tip to the right government agency costs nothing and starts a process that cannot be stopped. He sent his first anonymous tip to the Tennessee Department of Commerce and Insurance on a Tuesday morning in July. 3 weeks later, he sent a second tip. This one went to the IRS. He did not have to wait long. The IRS does not announce its investigations. Raymond Cole had no confirmation that anything was happening. No phone call, no letter, no indication at all that anyone had read what he sent. He went back to school in August. He taught his class. He watered the empty dirt in his front yard every morning because he had not yet decided what to plant. His neighbors noticed. A few of them asked about the garden. When Raymond explained what had happened, 2 of them told him stories he had not heard. One woman, 3 streets over, had received a remediation bill for $3,200 for a fence she had already painted the correct color. Another man had been charged $400 to remove a shed that turned out to be within every dimension specified in the covenant. Both of them had paid. Because what choice did they have? Raymond began keeping a second file. He wrote down names, dates, amounts. He asked his neighbors to send him any documentation they still had. Over the following 8 weeks, he collected records from 11 homeowners in Creekside Commons who believed they had been wrongly billed by Pratt Property Services. The total amount across those 11 cases, $41,700. He added it to the file he had already sent to the IRS. In October, something changed. Raymond was walking to his car one morning when a woman he did not know pulled up in front of his house. She got out and introduced herself. Her name was Patricia Hale. She was an investigator with the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. She said she had some questions about the Creekside Commons HOA. Raymond invited her inside. He sat down at his kitchen table and opened his file. The meeting lasted 4 hours. The investigation that followed took 7 months. State investigators, working alongside IRS agents and the Tennessee Division of Consumer Affairs, obtained full financial records for the Creekside Commons HOA. What they found inside those records was not what anyone had expected, including Raymond Cole. The $1.4 million in contractor payments to Pratt-connected companies was confirmed and documented. That alone was enough to support civil fraud charges, but the investigators found something else. The HOA's reserve fund, which on the annual statement sent to homeowners showed a balance of $2.3 million, had a different figure in the actual bank records. The actual balance was $470,000. The difference, $183 million had been moved across a series of transfers over 6 years into an account held by a shell company in Delaware. The shell company was called CCV Management Associates, LLC. CCV Management Associates, LLC had one member, Gerald Pratt. The charges filed against Gerald Pratt in May of the following year included wire fraud, fiduciary breach, criminal self-dealing under Tennessee HOA law, and tax evasion on income he had failed to report to the IRS, his brother. Kevin was charged as a co-conspirator, too. Other board members who had approved contracts without disclosing their knowledge of the conflict of interest were charged with aiding and abetting. Gerald Pratt was arrested at his home in Creekside Commons at 6:45 in the morning on a Thursday. His neighbors watched from their driveways, who was convicted 14 months later. He was sentenced to 11 years in federal prison. The HOA was dissolved by court order. The $470,000 remaining in the reserve fund was distributed back to homeowners. Assets seized from Pratt's personal accounts and the shell. Company added an additional $1.1 million to the recovery pool. Raymond Cole received a check for $23,400, his share of the remediation. Reimbursement plus his portion of the general recovery. He donated $10,000 of it to his school's library fund. In Margaret's name, he used the rest to rebuild the garden. Raymond planted the lavender border first. It was the same variety Margaret had chosen. He ordered it from the same nursery she had used. A small, family-owned place 40 miles outside of Clarksville that still had her name in their customer records from 2012. He replanted the rose bushes over the course of 3 weekends in September. 14 varieties, one for each year of their marriage. He had found the original tags she had kept in a jar in the garage, so he knew exactly which one went where. The Japanese maple took longer. He could not find one the right size. Every nursery he visited had younger trees, smaller, paler. He drove to 3 states looking. Finally, in a small nursery in western North Carolina, he found one. The color was exactly right. He planted it on a Saturday morning in October. His neighbor from across the street came over to help him set it in the ground. They did not talk much. There was not much to say. When the tree was in and the soil was packed and Raymond had stood back to look at it, his neighbor asked him if it was what he wanted. Raymond looked at the tree for a long time. Then he said yes. There is a footnote to this story that most people who know it consider the most remarkable part. In December of that same year, the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation, working with the Clarksville City Council, reviewed an application Raymond had submitted 7 months earlier. The application was for Heritage Landscape designation under Tennessee's Residential Cultural Preservation Ordinance. It is a designation reserved for landscapes of documented personal and historical significance to a community. The application included 11 years of photographs, Margaret's planting journals, letters from Raymond's neighbors, a letter from Lakewood Elementary signed by every member of the faculty, and a single photograph of Margaret, taken in the garden in the summer of 2019, 3 years before she died, kneeling in the dirt next to the Japanese maple with her hands in the soil and the sun behind her. The designation was approved. Raymond Cole's garden is now, officially and permanently, a protected heritage landscape. No HOA, no developer, no ordinance can touch it. He still waters it every morning before school. He still sends photographs. There is no one left to send them to. But he sends them anyway, to her email address, which he has never canceled, because some things you keep going even after the reason for them is gone, and some men you simply do not want to be on the wrong side of. If you made it this far, you already know why this story matters. It is not about a garden. It was never about a garden. It is about what happens when someone mistakes grief for weakness. Gerald Pratt looked at Raymond Cole and saw a man who had just buried his wife. A man who was quiet. A man who drove an old truck and taught 3rd grade and would probably just pay the fine and move on. He was wrong about all of it. Drop a comment below if you think Raymond should have done anything differently. Because I have a feeling this community has some thoughts, and if you want to see more stories like this one, you already know what to do.